The US Army is building flow batteries. Should you care? Is this good? Yes and yes. Hi, welcome back to Future History and the Time Vortex from the 2120s. The flow battery is essentially a liquid battery with two electrolytes of different kinds that have chemicals in them that create electrical charges. That's the main idea. We'll get a little deeper now, but you don't need to know much more than that. They're also called redox flow batteries. It stands for reduction oxidation. Those words both have to do with the loss and gain of electrons. Weirdly, oxidation is the loss of electrons and reduction is the gain of electrons. So just don't even think about that. Just think about the fact that it's flow because it's liquids. So the electrolytes in this battery are fluid, and there's a fluid cathode and a fluid anode, and those are the electrodes in a flow battery. And in the middle, there's a membrane that only allows the passage of ions, which are charged atoms or molecules of these electrolytes, to move back and forth in between. Then there's a pump system with compartments which moves the electrolytes around to generate a charge that travels through a circuit to power stuff. Okay, got it. That's a flow battery. So why build one? For one thing, they're cheap, and for another, they're resilient, and for a third, they are reusable. So cheap, you can source these electrolyte materials from relatively widely available stuff. You don't have to use fancy rare earths or rare liquids. You can just get like garden variety liquids. Not exactly gardens, but you know, like stuff with broad supply chains, which militaries tend to like because it makes them reliable and trustable even in unstable geopolitical moments, some of which tend to involve militaries for obvious reasons. Then it's reliable because they tend to be non-blowy-uppy and non-flamey. They're not going to catch fire and explode like lots of different kinds of battery materials can. So you can choose quite stable electrolyte materials. Again, a good choice for a military base where things tend to blow up sometimes. Third, rechargeability is really valuable, obviously, in batteries. And electrolytes in flow batteries are very rechargeable indeed, like to the tune of 10 to 20,000 full recharges can go by. The electrolytes are fine. In fact, what tends to break down in flow batteries is other stuff like the pump mechanisms or the membrane. So you have a virtually unlimited rechargeability. You've got like pretty good stability and pretty broad sourcing of materials. All this adds up to a pretty good package, especially for military applications, especially for military applications that don't have to be mobile. Forward operating bases where you're trying to get power to unstable areas, it's a little bit trickier, but for like a regular garden variety, again, military base around the world where you control the area pretty thoroughly, it's a good choice. And you can stack them so you can get more power out of them. What you're getting in Fort Carson in 2023-24 is about 1 megawatt for 10 consistent hours. That's enough to power like 400 houses in that area. It's pretty good. Obviously, it's hilariously small, but in the context of the 2120s. But for the 2020s, it's a good step. And you can stack them. You could build 100 more flow batteries and get 101 megawatts output. The output, by the way, varies by the size of your tanks for these electrolytes, and the intensity of the energy that you produce varies by the kind of electrolytes and by the kinds of stuff they're interacting with, like the membranes. Where are you going to see these? Everywhere. In the 2020s, this is a kind of new technology, but it's going to expand rapidly because the 2020s and 2030s, in a way, the big part of the story with regards to energy development is robustness of storage capacity. Increasing abilities all over the grid to keep energy that's coming in from lots of different sources, especially intermittent sources like wind and solar, but increasingly more fuel explosion sources like modular nuclear and emerging fusion technologies. You still need a place to keep all of that power to even out the fluctuations in how much power is coming in at different times and how much power people are using at different times. So, for instance, in the Fort Carson case, what they'll be doing with this battery initially is using it to take the edge off the electricity charges for the base during peak times. Like they'll charge it up with their renewable energy whenever they want, and then they'll draw on the battery instead of the grid during peak hours when most people are drawing on the grid and energy is more expensive. So you can sort of get around some of the economics by charging it up intelligently, and you can get around some of the intermittency of your green energy sources by storing that energy to be used when you need it. Militarily, this will stack quickly because it's so useful. It will show up all over the world, and it will get bigger and bigger and bigger to the point that these bases, many of them, will be capable of going offline from the grid for days, weeks, or even months. In the longer term, these batteries will interface with emerging tech like modular nuclear and fusion stuff, and even some space-based solar, although that will mostly be useful for forward operating bases and like even units that need power. Space-based solar is not particularly efficient, but it can be really useful for getting power to difficult to reach locations, which has obviously military applications. If you consider, if you're in a mech suit somewhere and you're out of juice, but you couldn't bring enough lithium ion and you don't have these big flow batteries to plug into, you could call, some space-based solar, juice up, on the go. Do they still exist in 100 years? Yeah, they're sort of way better in the 2120s, and they're no longer the dominant battery form. We have cooler, denser, solid-state batteries, but they are still useful in some places, some like remote locations on Earth and some remote locations in the solar system where you can use local materials on like Venus or Jupiter to create electrolytes that work there, and that way you can sort of deal with the economy of your local goods in a way that doesn't require you to create large amounts of materials across the solar system. All right, that's just about enough of that, isn't it? I hope you're feeling charged up positively, and even if you're negative, you can just switch it to the other end and get some better juice. All right, future, bye!